Good afternoon, everyone. As Heidi said, Steve Beshara appearing today as the CEO of the Lake Tahoe South Shore Chamber of Commerce. And I want to thank our board of directors and our staff for supporting our ability to partner with Heidi and the TPC and all the great sponsors that she just enumerated for us in putting together today's program. So yes, as Heidi mentioned, back towards the end of June, the Chamber organized one of our, what we call our Chamber Trek. And we talked about where we're going to go and what we were going to talk about, and our focus was housing. And in talking to a number of people, said, you need to go to Vail, you need to go to Eagle County, Summit County, Colorado, because they have a pretty successful program. And I say successful program, but it was through a lot of hard work. And as George, our keynote speaker today, has said, you know, it's sort of like painting a bridge. It's never over. You have to keep on working at it. And it's not just one kind of housing, it's all of the sorts of housing, the types of housing that you need in your community to be successful, because the key is a commitment to community. That's the key. So I do want to thank George for being here since Tuesday and going through a series of pretty much nonstop presentations, workshops, meetings. Very, very generous with his expertise, with his passion, with his time. And George, we really appreciate it. So a little bit about George. He is the housing director in Vail, Colorado. More than 24 years of mountain resort community experience, an expert in the creation and successful implementation of master plans and long-range planning initiatives that are focused on addressing the resort community's most challenging issues. We certainly share that with George's home community. The availability and affordability of housing remains the #1 most critical issue facing the Vail community. George previously served as Community Development Director for the town of Vail. During his 15-year tenure, he was directly responsible for facilitating and overseeing the development of the review process, the implementation of strategies for Vail's New Dawn, and the redevelopment of the Vail Valley Medical Center. He earned his BS degree in Public Administration and Policy Analysis from the University of Wisconsin, and a master's degree in Urban and Regional Planning from the University of Colorado, an active member of the American Institute of Certified Planners, American Planning Association, the International Code Council, that one sounds particularly interesting, and the Urban Land Institute. Please join me in welcoming George Ruther.
Good afternoon. Pleasure being here in Lake Tahoe. As I've shared with a number of folks, this is my first trip to Lake Tahoe, or to the Tahoe region, and that lake you have out there is absolutely gorgeous, stunning, to say the least. It has been a long week. I feel like in many ways I've shared this story over and over again, and I'm glad to do it another time. I'm going to be doing it Thursday and Friday next week as well at a conference of the Colorado Association of Ski Towns in Winter Park, Colorado. So getting a lot of practice and a lot of face time here with me. As Steve said, I am the housing director with the town of Vail in Vail, Colorado. Prior to that, I was the community development director for that community. And again, show of hands, who's been to Vail in the room? So a lot of people have been to Vail. Did anybody come to Vail while we were undergoing that redevelopment initiative, when we had 13 tower cranes erected within the community? You saw all that? You know, pretty sizable, you know, investment. That was a pretty significant and changing period of time for the Vail community. And again, that what was happening at that time was there was a renewed focus. The New Dawn initiative that we had in place at the time was really all about reinventing and reestablishing our place within the marketplace around the resort itself. Not a lot of effort was being put at that time into restoring and protecting and preserving our community. When we talk about Vail and we talk about our vision for our community, we talk about being the premier international mountain resort community. That is our vision. It's intended that resort community are combined in there as one term or one word. And that's because we are a resort and we are a community. But there's always is this competing need, you know, which one are we? At times we're very schizophrenic when it comes to to some of these issues. But again, we saw $2.5 billion of private sector reinvestment into the resort side of resort community. And while we've always had a housing program within the community, we've always had a housing challenge. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what some of those challenges are and were as we've moved forward. But 5 months ago, I transitioned from the community development director into the director for housing with our community. The town government decided, and the community as a whole decided, it was time we do something about this housing problem, and we do something in an immediate sort of way. And one of the initiatives we put in place was there was going to be reorganization of the town's government and the creation of a housing department, kind of around this notion of what you focus on determines what you miss. And we were focusing on the resort, therefore we were missing the community side of the conversation. So today I want to kind of focus my remarks throughout the presentation on a number of different things, and that is largely this, and kind of how we're beginning to make some successes. You know, and Steve asked me to come here today to talk about some of the successes and some of the challenges that we had, and in a way tell Vail's story about delivering housing to the community. So what I want to kind of focus my remarks on is a number of things. One, be willing to think different, take some risks, appropriate risks when necessary, embrace innovation and be bold, and then act now to realize your vision going forward. So with that in mind, I want to share a couple of perspectives with you. And I understand these are my perspectives and our perspectives, and everybody sees things in very different ways. You know, in this slide that's up on the screen right now, some people see the older woman in the screen. Other people see the younger lady, right? Who sees the older lady? Who sees, yeah, there you go. Who sees both? Who has no idea what I'm talking about? Excellent. Well, I'm going to, again, focus my remarks around, I think our systems are perfectly aligned to get the results that we're getting. Like feeding a downtown parking meter, a little change is all we need to fix the problem. And then first, we need to look in the rearview mirror to understand where we're actually going. So with that, a little bit of the evolution of housing within the Vail community. In Vail, we have a long history of housing in the community. Vail, by community standards, is a very young community. We just turned, well, we're 56 years old this year. And, it was founded first and foremost as a resort. That was its intent. It was going to be a ski resort. There wasn't a lot of conversation around community at the time. However, as the years progressed, the notion of growing into a community, unlike maybe Aspen and Park City and Breckenridge, where they were mining towns before they ever became, a resort, Vail has always been a resort. Before Vail was Vail, it was a sheep ranch. It was a sheep ranch and a lettuce farm is what grew in that area. So with that in mind, kind of an evolution of housing in Vail. Even as far back as 1964, we identified the need for seasonal housing within the community. Again, to address the seasonal need for the winter resort workers. One of my favorites is, in 1978, we hadn't addressed that need yet, but the workers had begun to address their need, and they started camping in some of the community parks. And an ordinance was passed, and this came right out of the local newspaper, the Vail Daily. Hippies are taking over our parks. And that was the solution to housing at the time. People took the matter into their own hands. Another of other events happened. I want to focus on a couple of key events that happened over time. 1973. In 1973, Vail adopted its first master plan for the community. And at that time, very thin document, very small document, but it identified 3 particular issues that needed to be addressed at that time. And those 3 issues were, 1, we needed to foster a year-round economy. If we were going to grow as a resort and a community, we had to grow a year-round economy within the community. Second was we had to address future parking, transportation, and delivery needs. If you've been to Vail, we pride ourselves on the pedestrian villages in those kind of car-free and vehicle-free areas in town and the public transit that we provide. And the third thing that we needed to address was to ensure an adequate supply of seasonal and workforce housing to meet the growing demands of the resort market. So that was 1973. Anybody want to guess what the 3 issues are that we face today? Again, and that's not to say we haven't addressed these issues. We have addressed these issues. But what it is to point out is that these issues evolve and manifest themselves differently over time. So while we've done a lot around the housing issue, we still have a housing issue. In fact, it's the #1 issue facing our community. Have we done anything with parking? Absolutely. We have 2 magnificent parking structures in one of the largest by ridership free public transportation systems in the country. With our transportation, but does it mean we need to do more? Of course, and we continue to do that. In 1990, in response to kind of this growing demand for housing now, not only for seasonal workers, but for year-round residents, we actually created the Vail Housing Authority. The Vail Housing Authority was put into place, and their mission was to focus its efforts on maintaining and expanding the supply of affordable housing opportunities to meet the broad need through a variety of public and private sector cooperative efforts. That was in 1990. You know, this is what you do, right? You form a committee, you form a group, they go out and they solve the problem. Well, what we did from 1990 to 2000 is we lost an entire decade, and we lost that decade by fighting, in my opinion. We spent 10 years fighting within the community about whose problem this was. Surely it was Vail Resorts' problem. Vail Resorts, they created the ski company. They're the largest employer in town. They must be the source of this problem. It's the business owners, the hoteliers, the restaurateurs. They're the ones that have the workforce needs. I don't have those needs. Heck, I just live here within the community. We spent, like I said, 10 years wasting time arguing about whose fault it was. All the while, the problem just continued to worsen. In 2001, the town has adopted something that is pretty significant for us. We adopted a zone district within the community that's the housing zone district. Within that zone district, for the planner types in the room, the only allowed and permitted use within that zone district is deed restricted employee housing. You can't build anything else in that zone district. If you want to ensure your results are aligned, and you want housing is the end results you want, zone it to the housing zone district, because that's what you're going to get in this case. In 2009, again, a turning point for us. We're still, making efforts and making headway with housing initiatives, but the town has, during this time, we've purchased made a $20 million investment in the community. We purchased an apartment building, about a 40-year-old, 35, 40-year-old apartment building that had deed restrictions on it for affordable housing, that was sunsetting within the very near future. The owner of the property was just chomping at the bit for that sunset provision to take place, because he was going to have 10 acres of unrestricted development kind of in the core area of Vail. And if you understand our real estate market and our development market, that was a significant opportunity. Well, the town stepped in and we purchased that property in the early 2000s for $20 million to simply protect those deed restrictions. That's how important employee housing was to us in the community. All the while, we believed what we were going to do was we'll protect those deed restrictions, we'll maintain them, we'll put a new restriction in place, and then we'll bring in a private sector developer to help us redevelop this property into additional affordable housing in the community. And then we spent about 8 years trying to get the performa to work. It literally took us 8 years to get the performa to work. In the end, the town, through the passage of this economic impact report on employee housing, we actually began to demonstrate what the value was within the community, because so much of the conversation was about whose fault it was and why should we even be worried about this problem to begin with, and why should we be spending taxpayer dollars on employee housing within our community? How does it benefit us? This report, in my opinion, it was a $18,000 expenditure. So it wasn't a significant sum of money for the benefit that we got, but it changed the conversation within our community. Our town council, for the first time, acknowledged that we were actually making an investment back into the community. We weren't just shelling money out, but we're actually making an investment back into the community, and that report helped them get to that place. Lastly, in 2017, the town passed an updated housing plan, the Vail Housing 2027 Master Plan. That master plan I'll talk about here in just a moment. That master plan is pretty simple in its approach. For those of you who are at the session just before this, I apologize, I'm going to repeat a little bit of this information, but That document is 15 pages in length. It was created in-house, and I wrote that document. Because I wrote that document, it's more pictures than it is words. But it's pretty simple in its approach, and that is a strategic plan for maintaining and sustaining community through the creation and support of resident housing in Vail. What's significant about this is up to this point, so much of the conversation again was about, well, is it employee housing or affordable housing or achievable housing or workforce housing or whose housing is this? And what it really came down to was what we've been doing is we're losing community within the town of Vail. We're losing our community. And what we need is we need year-round residents within the community. So what we did was we suggested a master plan that was pretty simple in its approach. It proposed a goal, and that goal was 1,000 net new deed-restricted units within the homes within the town of Vail by the year 2027. So in 10 years, 1,000 new deed-restricted units. We have 800 in the town today, so it's a pretty sizable bar to get over. Additionally, we put a means in place. Means in this case is the money. This is how we're going to get it done. And then lastly was the method. The method in this case was in working with the Housing Authority and working with the community, one of the things we identified was the decision-making process wasn't what it could be. It could have been better. So the decision was made that by the Housing Authority in their recommendation, what they suggested was, George, we need you to go to the town council, the decision makers, and tell them they're doing a really crappy job, that they're just not getting it done. And I got up to the podium that day and shared with them that we had built a better mousetrap, was a suggestion, and that we had another idea and another way of going about it. And in the end, what I was asking them to do was take a bit of a risk and to grant some decision-making authority to the local housing authority, let them act on your behalf. You know, in any given town council meeting, they could be talking about a myriad of issues from, you know, buying buses and snow plows and employment issues and special events and all of those things. And, you know, then we get 15 minutes on an agenda to talk about housing. And that was part of the problem. We weren't getting things done in a timely manner because we weren't single focused and we weren't being proactive. We weren't empowering ourselves to get things done. So we asked them to take a bit of a risk and grant some decision-making authority to the Vail Local Housing Authority. They did that. And in fact, and when we said that to them, we said, if we start acting outside of your bounds, then just pull the rug right back out from underneath us, and we will, and you can take this all back over the way it's always been. And you know, to date, it's working very well. But what we also did is we adopted a new program. And, you know, Vail, like Aspen, Park City, the Tahoe area, Breckenridge, Jackson Hole, all these resort communities, we have tools in place. We have commercial linkage, inclusionary zoning, development impact fees, and what do we also have? Anybody? Housing problems? We all have housing problems. What that suggests to me is we don't have the right tools in place. We need a new set of tools to change the way we're doing things. So the Vail and Deed program was put into place. The initiative was adopted and put in place. And you'll see it is all about reinvesting and investing back into our community. The problem, this is the problem that we were facing, or the problem that we do face in the town of Vail. In the town of Vail, we have about 5,300 year-round residents according to our 2010 U.S. Census. Those 5,300 folks live in about 1,750 occupied homes within the town of Vail, as well as the 700 deed-restricted homes on the bottom of the screen. Out of that total 7,200 homes that we have in town, about 4,700 of those, 4,800 of those are unoccupied vacant homes. Those are all second home properties. What we found in part of our problem, for those of you that have been to Vail, you've seen it, right? Where it's a pretty small community, long, linear, tucked down in the bottom of a mountain valley, surrounded by U.S. Forest Service property, kind of two ways in. You can come in through the Dow Junction Canyon on the west, or you can come over 11,000 feet over Vail Pass, you know, to the east and deal with all the problems Vail Pass sometimes creates for us. But we're essentially landlocked. We don't really have any opportunities to expand our growth. So what we found with land area was 9.5 times out of 10, when a local occupied property sold and went onto the market, it sold to a second homeowner and it moved into that 4,800 home pool. And every time that happened, we lost a dwelling unit, we lost the land it sat on, and we lost an opportunity for a local to continue living in that home, and we lost our community. So we set about a process to protect some of the existing homes that we have, because we know full well, and we heard, I think, some of these remarks this morning, we're not going to build our way out of this problem. We're going to have to come up with some other more unique and creative solutions to get there. We're going to have to think differently about this. We're going to have to embrace some innovation if we're going to change what we're getting. And again, we have all the same tools that everybody has to protect homes, but we continue to have a problem. Vail Indeed was all about changing the way we go about protecting and preserving homes in the town. I am happy to talk about this. I've been talking about the Vail Indeed program since Tuesday, I believe. I could continue talking about the Vail Indeed program, but if you go to our website, we do have a website, vailindeed.com. Take a look at that. If you have questions, give me a call. Always happy to answer the questions about that. But it is a pretty unique and innovative solution that we're using, where we're buying deed restrictions from property owners on existing homes within the community. So we actually purchase a deed restriction on one of these unrestricted homes, and it becomes restricted into the future, and it then therefore stays in that pool on the bottom of the screen. It's not lost. Why is more not getting done? I think we heard a little of these remarks as well this morning. The shared economy, the cost of construction, shortage of labor, scarcity of land, access to financing. There's a number of reasons why things aren't getting done within our communities, and I think that becomes the real challenge, is how do we think differently about some of these issues so we can actually get more done? And one of the ways in the town of Vail that we've talked about thinking differently is changing our review process. You know, one of the things we heard over and over again, and before I made this transition into the housing department, one of the serious considerations that I wanted to share with the organization was our success in that $2.5 billion redevelopment process was when the community development department got flooded with that amount of activity. It was like pouring gasoline onto a fire. It just exploded. Vail Resorts owned a commercial property in the center of our Lions Head village in town. They came into the town of Vail with a development application to redevelop that, what we called the Core Site Hotel at the time. They came in with that application, and as soon as Vail Resorts kind of hit that switch and people saw Vail Resorts making that kind of investment in the community, in came the applications. And like I said, over the next 6 years, we did $2.5 billion of development review. In order to do $2.5 billion of development review, I'm the first one to tell you, you can't do it the way you thought you were doing it in the past. It just doesn't happen. Your process goes out the door. So one of the conversations that we had when we made this transition was, if we were successful doing that with our redeveloping the resort side of the community, why can't we use that to bring more private sector investment into the community for housing? And this slide here kind of shows you, I mean, these are real numbers. You know, this is a real impact on a development application. If you've been involved in the development process and you understand, you know, again, you're submitting an application, and about the only thing that's within your control at that time is when you submit the application. You have no idea how long it's going to take you, what the process may or may not yield at the end of that review process. And when these types of costs are associated with the review process, we need to figure out a better way, think differently about our review process. In fact, at one time I shared with all the folks in the community development department, we had so much process we could make Velveeta cheese. Literally. And if you look at Velveeta cheese, have you ever looked at Velveeta cheese? It's not Velveeta cheese, it's Velveeta cheese product, because it has been processed so much. So what we had was development review product, not development review. So what can we do about it? Like feeding a downtown parking meter, a little change is the solution to the problem we have. Some challenges and some solutions. Here's a list. I'm going to go into a few of these in greater detail, but I do want to point out, you know, there's a lot of opportunity. I think that's what this slide indicates to me, is there's a lot of opportunity, and it all doesn't have to cost money. What I continually hear in my housing director role is, but you know, where's the money coming from? But where's the money? It doesn't all have to be about money. A lot of times it's not what we do, it's how we do it. That's going to change the results that we actually get. talking about in that slide in some change vision. You know, in the town of Vail, one of the things that's been very helpful to us in achieving the goals around housing is we have a very clear vision within the community about what we want to be and who we want to be when we grow up. And that, again, is to be the premier international mountain resort community. I had an opportunity one time reading through some literature about organizational development around culture. And the researchers were interviewing folks at NASA back in the day, back when, and they were asking people, you know, well, what's your job here at NASA? And people went around answering the question. I'm a rocket scientist, and I build rockets, and I'm a fuels engineer, and I do this, that, and the other thing. And then they asked another gentleman who was on the janitorial staff, you know, what's your job here at NASA? And his answer was, my job is to put a man on the moon. And when you think about that and how powerful that is, I mean, that's somebody who knows where they're going and what their purpose is. So we adopt this vision, and then we follow up with a mission, especially within the housing department. And our mission is realizing Vail's vision one deed restriction at a time. You know, if I look at that goal that was put in place for us, 1,000 net new deed restrictions by the year 2027, you know, overwhelming, absolutely overwhelming. If you kind of break it down and, you know, you eat an elephant one bite at a time like we're attempting to here, it actually becomes a manageable approach to moving forward. Also, values. In the housing department, we talk a lot about values to achieve our goals and put our mission into place. We like to talk about building developments, not projects. You know, that was a project sometimes has a connotation that, at least in our community, you know, everybody's like, we're going to build more housing projects. You know, like somehow we're building these projects of the 70s and 80s. No, that's not what we're doing. What we're doing is we're building community, and we're building developments. We build homes, not units. We focus on quality, not quantity. We focus on a wide range of market segments. Every one of the market segments within the Vail economy has a need for housing. Everywhere from below 60% of area median income all the way to 180% of area median income and beyond, and everything in between. It's a significant issue for us, and that's how bad the crisis has gotten for us. We think differently and seek innovative solutions when we're proposing options for moving our programs forward. We think about the triple bottom line approach. You know, so much of the conversation that I hear today, especially in a community like Vail, where we are somewhat constrained from a transportation standpoint. While I-70 runs through the community, it's not something that we want to continue to add traffic to. So if we don't begin to address some of these housing issues within the town of Vail, I'm concerned that all we're doing is trading one problem for another. And in fact, regrettably, you know, today the town of Vail is nearing the completion of a new parking structure in the community to handle some traffic demands in the community, and that parking structure cost $16 million. Anybody want to venture to guess how many parking spaces we're getting for $16 million? 160 parking spaces. 160 parking spaces for $16 million. You know how many homes we could build for $16 million? A fair number. We also collaborate, and we're open to business. The private sector helped us with the resort side of our issue. When we had some concerns on the resort side of resort community, the private sector can help us with the community side as well. And you know, in a community like Vail, I heard a lot of rhetoric and input and comment about, well, we're too pro-development. You know, the community development department is too pro-development. And I'd often suggest to folks, well, you know, we have master plans. We have land use regulations to go with those, to implement those master plans. And isn't it our job to help facilitate people to implement our master plans? In the town of Vail, 100% of our land area is governed in one way or another by a master plan, sub-area plan, some type of planning document. However, only 85% of that land area, or excuse me, 85% of that land area is held in the private sector hands. So 15% is town of Vail's. And most of those are parks and public facilities like our public works facility and police department and et cetera. So in my way of thinking, if you want to implement your master plan, you better turn to the private sector or else you're not going to get much done within your community. We measure our results and we correct our course as necessary. That's kind of around that risk-taking notion. Often I don't encourage people to, jump out of airplanes without parachutes, but evaluate your risk and take a little bit of risk. The worst thing, in my opinion, that can happen is you go back and you turn around and go back to do it the way you were doing it before. But who knows, if you take a little bit of risk, maybe you'll end up with a different result. And then again, being fiscally responsible and stewards of the public trust. I think this is what largely got us through the town council's conversation when we asked them to grant some decision-making authority to their local housing authority, was trust us. We're all rowing in the same direction for all the same reasons and needs. You just have to believe that's the direction we're going. We're going to be fiscally responsible, and we're going to be good stewards with the public's money. In fact, I often share we're only one bad housing development project away from this whole thing unraveling on us. So the bar is raised pretty high when it comes to getting this stuff done. Creating a culture of getting to yes. One of the things I think that has been extremely successful for us is this notion of, not every development project that we see is going to be a getting to yes. Are we going to say yes? But we can get to no quickly. And that's what the development community is looking for, is if you can't get to yes, then at least get to no quickly. Be a facilitator versus a regulator, and I know that's sometimes hard to do, but help facilitate these processes. Be solutions oriented. Codes bend, they don't break. When I was in the community development director role, every new building official that ever came on board, or new building inspector, I'd always kind of share with them, codes bend, they don't break. Look at this book, it's not breaking on us. Let's use our knowledge and our expertise to get to the intent of the regulation and get that put in place versus the black and white and simply saying no. Be a problem solver, seek innovation, take some risks, and be nimble, flexible, and adaptable. I talked a little bit about the housing zone district. And again, what that housing zone district did for us was it created a single purpose for that land use. That's the only thing we're going to get. And then outside of that, we threw the rest of the development standards by the wayside. I keep hearing in these conversations today a lot of discussion about the coverage requirement that you have here within the planning basin. We took a different approach, and we said what we're going to do is we're going to identify from a performance perspective what we want to achieve, and however you get there is how you get there. But we're going to provide flexibility in doing so. Parking management is largely the way we've done that. I hear over and over again, I heard in the panel conversation that we were part of just before lunch, that parking was a significant impediment to getting some development done in a financially feasible sort of way. What we've said was parking's not the issue. Parking is just really a symptom of the real problem. The problem is transportation. And if you meet the residents' transportation needs, and you can meet those needs by some means other than the private vehicle, then you don't need parking spaces to go with it. I saw a great diagram just before I came here, and I wish I would have had time to get it into this slide presentation. But it showed the square footage area of an average 900 square foot 2-bedroom apartment, and then the associated parking requirement that goes with it. Many communities, that's 1.5 to 2 parking spaces with the associated drive aisle that goes along with that. Anybody want to venture to guess what the square footage area of 1.5 parking spaces is for a 900 square foot apartment? Guess. 488 square feet. 488 square. So to build a 900 square foot apartment, you need 488 square feet of parking. Heck, that's another 1-bedroom apartment if you can figure out a different way to address your transportation needs. Call me crazy, but I think we may be a little bit insane. We're guilty of this in the town of Vail. We continued to do things over and over again the exact same way, expecting a different result. Again, I encourage you to think differently about these problems. In the town, we talk a lot about, what are the economic benefits of housing, and I shared with you the economic report that we had talked about. But I think the real issue lies somewhere else. And I'm going to need your help with this. Does anybody know what flash? And for those of you who saw this presentation the other day, don't give away all the good secrets. Not yet. At least not yet. Anybody know what flashbulb memory is? The notion is? That just went off? I just thought of it. Thank you. Thank you. Flashbulb memory, the concept is it's that vivid memory you have of where you were and what you were doing at a significant moment in time when an event happened. So I need some participation, all right? So if I were to suggest to you, I believe it's November 22nd, 1963. JFK, exactly. The assassination of President Kennedy. February 22nd, 1980. This is one of my favorites. No. The U.S. shocks my movie, yeah, right? Who can forget? Now, everybody, USA, right? January 28th, 1986. That's the Challenger, exactly. Challenger tragedy happens. November 9th, 1989. There you go, the Berlin Wall. The beginning to the end of communism. Pretty significant moment in time. February 1972. Everybody knows this one. That was the night the lights went out in Georgia. And again, I always share, it wouldn't be so funny if you were the innocent man, because that's wouldn't be so funny. January 17th, 2008. Your birthday. There you go. Happy birthday. January 17th, 2008. That was Vail's culinary catastrophe. That was the day the Sweet Basil restaurant, one of the most popular restaurants in all of Vail, announced that they were closed for lunch, or closing for lunch on Mondays and Tuesdays. And the reason they were closing for lunch, according to the owners of the business, the major cause is the lack in quality of employees, and quality employees could not find places to call homes in our communities, and we will not run a business with anything but less than the best employees available. So we're going to close the restaurant for lunch. You close Sweet Basil restaurant in Vail, and you've raised people's attention. For us, that was a significant moment in time. I know where I was. I was in my office, listening to all the phone calls come in going, what are you guys going to do about housing so Sweet Basil can open back up again? The reason I share that event that happened in Vail with you is because I think for the first time, we personalized the problem. Everyone in the community began to fully understand what the issue around housing was and what impacts it had on them personally and directly in their world and in their environment. And I suspect, looking around this room, everybody in this room has a story about housing that they too could share. And it's when you begin to share that story and people personalize the problem that we actually begin to see some of the results that we're seeing with housing. That lost decade that I talked about, I think we lost that decade because it wasn't personal to me. They're not my employees. I don't care. Well, you care when your sink is overflowing and you need a plumber and there isn't one to come to your house. Or in our case, we had a situation where a water main broke in the town of Vail. And the nearest employee with our water district that had the ability to go into that confined space and shut off that valve and get that issue addressed was 42 miles away and could not be reached. I mean, think about that. That became a very personal problem for those people in that neighborhood. And you know what they wanted? They wanted employee housing in the town immediately. And you know who they wanted it for? Critical employees. And you know what was the result of that outcome? The town of Vail partnered with the water district, and we built 18 townhomes in the town of Vail that are dedicated to critical employees within the water district and the town's organization. So we now have that individual that can shut off that water main is located minutes in any direction within the town of Vail. Our firefighters, we wish we could keep our firefighters in our community. I was sharing with some folks here earlier In Vail, the problem has gotten so significant. I want to say all but some of the upper ranking officers in our fire department live in Denver, 2 hours away, which isn't a problem as long as we don't have a fire, right? You know, as long as we don't have a fire, or we don't have a God forbid we have a wildfire somewhere between Denver and Vail, and the only way into the community is over Vail Pass, and they can't get there. I mean, there's another way in, but it takes you about 3.5, 4 hours to go all the way around, you know, to get into the community. So it's a very real issue. What does the no action alternative look like? You know, loss of community. I've talked a lot about loss of community. In Eagle County, nearly 2 in 5 homes are classified as vacant. In Vail, nearly 70% of those homes are classified as vacant. 2 out of 3 employers and employees indicate the availability of housing is a major frustration for them. We actually have employers now seeking employees, and the very first question they're asked in their interview is what? Do you have a place to live? I mean, imagine running a business where that's the top qualification. You know, do you have a place to live? Not can you make change, you know, not can you prepare food. It's do you have a place to live? Housing, again, is more than double is the single greatest issue facing the Vail community overall. I had an opportunity a number of years back to I serve on the Urban Land Use Institute's Technical Advisory Committee, and we were invited by the island of Anna Maria down in the Florida Gulf Coast. And it's 3 communities on an island that looks a lot like Vail does, except they're an island and we're amongst the U.S. Forest Service. And their issue was this. Their issue was around transportation and this change in community. All of the residences within the community were being purchased for short-term rental opportunities and vacation homes. And they had a significant traffic problem, again, coming into the community. And we went down to the island to help them, you know, work through some of their issues and have some of their conversations. But what was ironic to me, and I was the only public sector planner, the rest were traffic engineers and economists and all sorts of specialists on that panel. And I was the only public sector planner, and I asked the question about, because I'd met with the school board folks, and they were talking about the dynamics within the population of the elementary school, one elementary school on the island. And presently, at that time, 48% of the students going to that school were being bused onto the island to go to school. 52% lived on the island. But the trend analysis showed this. They were going in the opposite direction. And it wasn't going to be long, within a couple of years, it wasn't going to be long before those numbers flipped on their head and got even worse. What do you think happens to that school when you're busing 60% of the kids onto the island and only 40% are on the island? Right, the school's going to go away. The school's going to the mainland. And when the school goes to the mainland, so goes all the families. Ironically enough, in researching on Anna Maria Island, one of the recommendations that I shared was I said, well, just go right back to your roots for the solution to your problem. And people looked at me a little odd, and I said, anybody have any history with Anna Maria Island and know what it was used for in its earliest days? It was the winter grounds for employees and the animals of the Barnum and Bailey Circus. So I said, you know, go back to your roots. This started as employee housing here on your community. I mean, that's the basis of it. Go right back to that. You know, figure out ways to keep people living in your community. It's important to you because loss of community has significant impacts on you know, where you want to go and where you want to be in the future. Lastly, the no action alternative, the lost economic opportunity. This is significant, especially I think to a group like we're convening here today. 76% of the business owners in Vail would grow or expand if they could, but they can't because they can't find those quality employees that they need. That's just very telling. I mean, that's a threat to us. You know, our economy is driven solely by sales, primarily by sales tax. And sales tax comes in the form of our guests and visitors coming in and seeing us. And when our businesses can't expand, so goes our economy as well. Nearly 1,600 jobs went unfilled last ski season in the town of Vail. We only have 9,300 jobs total within the community altogether. So that's an impact. 58% of the open positions currently take more than 1 month to fill. 67% of the employers indicate the lack of housing has a substantial cost to their business. We've actually, as part of that economic impact report, we actually attempted to quantify this in a very rudimentary sort of way, but we identified about $12.5 million of direct cost impacts to our businesses on an annual basis when we cannot find employees. That's around the continual recruitment and retention and training and commuting costs that people tend to pay or employers have to pay to incent to get employees to come in and work within the community. We did a housing development project in town, and at the time we did a market study, and our market study suggested that, you know, by and large, people, again, they have the ability to make the mortgage payments. What they didn't, again, have what was that down payment opportunity, and business owners were actually having to make financial investments in trying to purchase property for their residents, you know, or excuse me, their employees to live in. And those costs are real and significant. Additionally, you know, we talk to our employers across the board, and what they will share with us, from the mom and pops to the largest of employers, Vail Resorts and the Vail Valley Medical Center, excuse me, they share with us is this notion of, you know, they're not in the business of being property managers and residential property owners. What they want to do is they want to run their business. However, if we provide them with opportunities for housing in the community, they will be active participants in that process. And then lastly, impacts on customer service and guest expectations. I suspect the same is true around the Tahoe region, but in Vail, I think the only product we buy, sell, and trade is customer and guest experience. I mean, that's what we deliver, is customer and guest experience. And when restaurants and businesses close because of the lack of quality, it has a real, of employees, it has a real impact upon our economy and our ability to grow and move forward. So with that, I'd suggest the future's in our hands. I'd encourage us all to think differently, take risks, embrace innovation, be bold, and choose to take some actions. I had an opportunity one time on a development that we were doing in town to sit in on an executive session when the town was actually purchasing a piece of property to do this development. And we were sitting in an executive session with the town council and the mayor, and the conversation about purchase price came up. And a little bit of history on the property, the property was vacant but for a small Wendy's fast food restaurant was on there. And the franchisee had a pretty lucrative lease agreement with the property owner, and it was gonna be some trouble for the property owner to get out of that lease agreement with the town. And we decided that, you know, it was gonna probably be some financial impact to that property owner to get out of that lease agreement. And our mayor at the time said, well, this is the asking price. I say we pay him $500,000 over the asking price to make this problem go away. And everybody in the room kind of, well, why would we do that? Why on earth would we spend $500,000 over the asking price for a piece of property to build housing on? And the response was pretty simple, was 10 years from now, no one will remember how much we paid from the property or for the property. The only thing they'll remember is whether we chose to act. And I would encourage everybody in this room to take action. I think, you know, throughout this week, I've continually been asking, hey, George, what's the secret sauce? You know, how do you get it done? Can you leave the recipe behind? I will leave the recipe behind because the recipe is in this room. I think it's the people in this room that have the answers. The reason I believe that is because the answers to our problem were in rooms just like this back in Vail, Colorado. I think it's when the community comes together and has this tough conversation. It's not easy, it never will be easy, but has this tough conversation, I think you will come up with the secret sauce. So with that, I'm gonna leave you with one more flashbulb memory of sorts. And that is October, what's today? 19th. October 19th, 2019. No, flashbulb memory, 2019. Year from our conference. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, George. You do have to hold it up close, but we have a few minutes for some audience questions, but thank you. I've got this side of the room. Any questions for George? Comments? is going to get you, Renee.
Oh, I just wanted to know, have you seen any master lease programs in Vail?
Does this come out? Yes, we do. We have a number of master lease programs. And in fact, when the town purchased that Timber Ridge development, those 200 apartments, right out of the gates, we immediately, to kind of secure our future in that purchase of the property, we master leased with Vail Resorts. There's about 200 homes in that development project. We saw probably 80 to 90% of the homes were a master lease situation. What we've done since then is we've kind of diversified, and we've said we're no longer going to be the sole provider of that type of housing for Vail Resorts. So we've significantly reduced the number of homes that we master lease to them down to about 54, or a very small 25% of the total homes on that site. But more importantly, what we've done is we've seen the Vail Valley Medical Center. They've actually changed their attention to understanding that this is a problem they too need to kind of embrace and get a hold of. They have created a housing kind of department or division within the hospital, and they do master leases throughout the valley and the community. And the one thing that's really nice about that, especially when I talk to landlords, is they love master leasing to the Vail Valley Medical Center. The reason being is because they're assured of where the payment is coming from. You know, it's coming from, and they also know that in situations where if they have a problem with the tenant that's staying there, they just pick up the phone and call the employer who has that master lease. But then additionally, something that we just did on Tuesday evening, after about 4 months of negotiation and conversations, the town of Vail, along with Eagle County and a private developer, we just purchased deed restrictions on a brand new apartment development down valley, about 15 miles from Vail, where the town purchased deed restrictions on that property. And the whole intent of that in doing so was the deed restriction grants preference to employees working within even though it's outside the town of Vail, it grants preference to employees working in Vail or employers with business licenses within the town of Vail. Because what we heard over and over again was, again, I'm a great retailer, I'm not a good property manager, but if you gave me an opportunity, I'll be the first one to step in line and take one of these leases and get it in place. So we actually got that agreement signed on Tuesday evening, which was pretty exciting. So yes, we do master leases.
One more question, and if you look on your tables, there should be some thumbs up. I want a photo op with all of you holding your thumbs up if you'd like speakers so far today. So after Frank's question.
I can probably be loud enough.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
Good to see you again, George. You mentioned public transportation.
Yes.
Can you tell us, if you know, what percentage of the operating budget comes from the town?
Of the town's transportation budget, I want to say nearly 100%.
So the town operates
Absolutely, yes.
the free transportation system.
And we use some lodging and lift tax revenues to help fund that program. And we see that, that goes hand in hand. In fact, we just recently had a development application come before us where we significantly looked at changes in density, increasing density. And there was a comment earlier today about some NIMBYism in one of the panels we talked about, and the folks, that came forward said, well, you know what this is going to do? This is just going to fill our buses up. And I was like, perfect. That's what we want. Well, what if we have to run another bus? Well, that'll be a problem we would love to have, is to have to run another bus, because that's success. So, we see the housing issue, and again, if you've been to Vail, you know some of the challenges, and we can't keep building parking structures, and we'd love to come up with solutions that are transportation oriented. Unfortunately, once you go outside of the actual town of Vail boundaries, we would then rely upon a regional transportation authority, and that's a lot of the conversation we're having today is, everybody bring your strengths to the table when we talk about these partnerships, and one of the strengths that the Eagle County has is they run that regional transportation system. And in fact, those deed restrictions that we just purchased on Tuesday evening, 15 miles down valley, we've had our town council actually say, if Eagle County is not going to up the game and get that transportation, then maybe we'll start taking town buses down and bringing some critical mass of employees back into town to address this issue. So yeah, transportation's big for us.
Great linkage
thumbs up. Just, yeah, photo op. Thank you. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, George.
Thank you.
Everybody